Hey everybody, so we're going to go ahead and start talking about the module on family and family dynamics. So let's go ahead and I will share my screen. Boom. All right. Oh no, there we go. Screen sharing has stopped. All right, let's try this again. There we go. All right, we're going to do this. Okay. So, family, as defined in your book, is a group of individuals related to one another by blood ties, marriage, or adoption, who form an economic unit of adult members in which are responsible for the upbringing of children. So, they have a very kind of traditionalist idea of what family is. More commonly, people consider family to be those who support, who are stable in their lives, who endure an extended period of time, and who provide some kind of closeness, contentment. So, and we'll talk about more about this as we move forward, but families aren't always about blood ties, marriage, or adoption. Sometimes they're about specific kinds of familial like bonds that happen with two people who don't have any of those things or who are not legally necessarily bonded to anyone that they share family dynamics with. We're also going to talk a little bit about chosen families as we move forward. There's a wide variety of who humans consider to be family and who they don't, and why. And that's changed over time, space, and really just the necessity of certain relationships and the inability to get them in some cases. So, all right, let's keep moving. Marriage is a socially approved sexual relationship between two individuals. Um, and this is, again, not always has it been necessarily revolving around that, but it's about that particular act, um, more about the societal impacts that it can give you. So the rewards that you get from that, which include like in our society, maybe tax cuts, being able to be put on insurance, death benefits, being able to be in a hospital room with somebody if they're ill, being able to make those decisions, those kinds of things. Marriage historically has involved two persons of opposite sex, but in the past decade, marriage between same sex partners has been ruled legal in the United States and a number of growing nations around the world. Again, there are some debate over whether or not marriage equality will stay, given the inflexibility of Hobbes after the Roe v. Wade decision. However, it is something that um, is overwhelmingly accepted within our society or within the US anyway. It's overwhelmingly supported as a vital societal right for those in the LGBTQ plus um, demographic. Also, on that note, same-sex marriages are something that's on the docket for the Senate to vote on. So that will be interesting coming up here, I believe, this month. And we're in October of 2022, but it might be, and they might have shifted it to put it on the docket for after the elections, which would have a very interesting dynamic play out for the elections, depending on when it happens for the midterms. However, no matter when it happens, those votes within that particular framework would have an impact on this, and it wouldn't be necessarily reliant on a legal case anymore. Marriage normally is the form or basis of family, or is the basis of a family of procreation. Again, that marriage is in a traditional outlook, you're going to look at marriage as that thing that society deems acceptable for you to move on, to have kids, to live together, to blah, 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 blah. Socially, and historically, marriage was really about being able to create heirs for property ownership. It was about being able to up your social status depending on if you were marrying maybe your daughter into a more prominent family. It was about in a lot of circumstances, in a lot of societies, the women were considered more of a like property, more of a something to be sold to someone else, which is why you had things like bride prices, things like dowries, which were just essentially, I will let my kid marry your kid as long as that comes with certain social benefits. And again, we look at marriage in this very like non-historic way because this was very very recent when all of these things, and in some cases in some countries still happens, but when we talk about marriage we generally, like, you think of this guy and a girl getting married on like in a rom-com movie or something, as opposed to marriage really cross culturally is this idea of two people being able to have a bond and it come with social benefits, some kind of benefit, whether that be, again, being able to be by someone's side, whether it be a tax write-off, whether it be economically being able to get loans together for a house or what have you. No matter what the benefit is, depending on the society, there are specific benefits tied to that particular form of relationship. All right. So the book talks about a couple different kinds of families. And then again, we're going to get into some of the other terms that may not have been in there as well. But when they talk about the nuclear family, you're talking about two adults and their kids, essentially, or depending on what society you're in, a polyamorous family might have more than two adults and kids. It just depends on where you are. But that nuclear family is just essentially those adults that are having the kids and the kids. Or caring for the kids and the kids. And then your extended family is going to be more than two generations of relatives living together, and or like say aunts and uncles or two sisters raising their kids together or what have you. That extension is out of that nuclear family, or those people that are specifically caring for those dependent children, or have had those dependent children. So those are going to be the legal guardians of those dependent children, if that makes sense. We also talk about and ways that the nuclear family is being reassessed and kind of talked about in a different way is really having people that are just two people that are together, that are living together, or two people and maybe they're pets, and or maybe a person raising kids by themselves. Really talking about that nuclear family not being necessarily two adults and two kids, in that traditional sense. And it's also talking about, again, having more like queering the idea of nuclear family in the sense that, you can have more than two adults that are raising kids together in a household. And not always does it have relationships tied to that in a sexual manner. But sometimes it's maybe a couple and maybe like the two biological parents split or what have you, and one of them married or is in another relationship, and all three of those decide to co-parent in the same household to combine economic benefits or just to be able to be around kids or what have you. There's a lot of different ways in which families can operate in a nuclear sense, or even the extended family. Multi-generational households are more likely to happen in impoverished areas and within communities that have particularly had economic means that disallowed them things like being able to provide childcare or pay for childcare. So having an extended family member like a grandparent being able to do that. And then you also see it as a cultural thing in multiple different cultural variations. Families of orientations are families in which individuals are born, or they're families of origin. So that's, again, that nuclear family for which you were born into. And families of procreation are in which the ones that you cohabitate or marry or have kids in yourself. So like my nuclear family is me, my partner, and my kids. However, my family of orientation would be my parents, my sister, and myself. And that's kind of where that varies. Different types of marriages. So you can have monogamy, which is a form of marriage in which each married partner is only allowed to have their spouse at any given time, and that's just and that's the primary form of marriage you'll see in the United States, but not always in every culture or every variation. And monogamy is actually a very recent phenomenon. that happens in society. Polygamy is a form of marriage in which a person may or have two or more spouses simultaneously. Um, sorry. Polyandry is a form of marriage in which women may have more than one husband, and polygamy is where a man has more than one wife. So you're going to see this in different variations. So you're going to see more polyandrous marriages in things where, like, say, maybe there's some Nordic cultures where, indigenous cultures where, women who like lived in farming communities and things of that nature would have more than one husband because they would have a pack of animals or a large farm or what have you to take care of, and it made more sense for her to have more than one husband in order to continue to reproduce, but also so that there was more manual labor on, in particular, domestic situations. And then you have multiple reasons for the opposite to happen as well. But again, most of these are culturally linked. And again, monogamy is something that is a very recent phenomenon. All right. So your primary socialization, or the process in which really like you learn essentially how to be a human first, is going to happen in the family. Specifically, kids are going to learn from the adults that are caring for them in whatever form or fashion. The people that are older than them in their society are going to teach them how to exist in their society. And then personality stabilization is, according to the functionalist theory, the family plays a crucial role in assisting adult members emotionally. So essentially, marriage is the arrangement through which personalities are supported and kept healthy. So those distinct adult relationships are going to be essentially who you rely on when you are in any kind of distress emotionally. You're going to go to your partner. You're going to go to your really close friends. You're going to go to possibly even your parents or a close family member that you have within your social network. Parsons really regarded the nuclear family as the best equipped to handle the demands of an industrial society. In this arrangement, the husband would be the breadwinner, and the wife would essentially be the emotional support and doing most of the household labor. Parsons' views are now criticized as being inadequate, outdated, and overly focused on family alone. It also doesn't necessarily take into account the amount of economic means that a one-income family would have to have comparatively to when Parsons was talking about this. Not to mention that even when Parsons was talking about this, overwhelmingly, people of color have never been in a situation where a one income household was an option due to the amount of economic discrimination that is happening in our society and in those which would be thinking about this particular traditional idea of what family looks like. So when we talk about symbolic interactionist approaches, we're going to talk about Burgess and really describe the family as a unit of interacting personalities, which is really just talking about when you get your family together. And this is how I really always remembered this one, is that you get everybody together in your multiple generations or your families or your cousins or whoever comes over for like that big family meal. All those personalities start interacting with each other. If for good, bad, or otherwise. That's the thing that I see, is that table with a whole bunch of different personalities in it. Maybe less than tactfully avoiding certain conversations or getting into conversations, or even maybe being that table that really is there to support each other and really build each other up. And that is the time in which those like you get to explain what you've been doing in school, or you get to talk about the things you've learned and it be really well received. That may not be necessarily the norm for everybody, but I'm sure that those families are out there. Waller really developed the principle of at least interest to show that your partner who is least committed to or interested in their romantic relationship has more power and might often exploit that power. So really that's just talking about if you're in any kind of domestic situation, whether it be or any kind of relationship for that matter, the person who's least interested in that relationship is going to hold power because they're not emotionally connected in a way that can give them um, vulnerability. And so the person that's most invested in that relationship is going to be vulnerable enough that that power can be exploited because their vested interest is in that relationship as opposed and in that other person as opposed to not being. And so the person that's vested interest is not necessarily in that relationship or is least invested in that is going to have an amount of power because they have the ability to walk away in a way that um, may not be healthy to the other person or talk to the other person in a way that may not be healthy. And this exploitation of power can get to a point where it's very abusive and very inappropriate even. More contemporary work emphasizes on the way family members continuing to negotiate, define, and redefine their roles. And so that's really talking about how when you're in those situations, say that multi-generational family dinner or what have you, there's going to be a point where the older generation may not be able to be the one that's cooking or the one that's hosting. And that may be brought down to another person in that family unit. Okay, so now you're going to host, you're going to cook. These are the things that these are the traditions we're going to bring down to you, and this is how you're going to navigate that. And so it's really talking about how those roles are going to are going to be redefined depending on who you are. That point in which you don't have to sit at the children's table anymore, and you get to sit at the adults table, right? Or you're bringing your own children at this point, and another generation continues that particular tradition. Feminist approaches. So in The Feminine Mystique, Friedan wrote about the problem with no name, which is the isolation and boredom of many suburban American housewives trapped in an endless cycle of childcare and housework. She talked about this. This was a very important moment in the feminist movement. However, it was also one of the most looking through a very privileged economic lens moments of our feminist movement as well. So, in the same time that this was a big movement because it really was talking about the fact that women had more to give in society than just being housewives. They really wanted to be out in the workforce. They really wanted to be part of society in a more outward way as opposed to just, yeah, I'm raising kids that are going to go be part of the society. It was more about, I also want to engage in this. The problem became that this was really talking about a very specific economic class and a very white group of women. And so when that became the focus of we should have rights to work, we should have the rights to do all of this, it was very disconnected from the economically underprivileged and people of color who were already having to work and who really wanted to be able to live and exist on a single income measurement. They wanted to be able to maybe be the primary caregivers for their family, but that was not necessarily applicable to them because they had always had to work in order to economically survive. So there was really this undertone of privilege within her book and within this notion, but it also became a very big stepping stone for really rights and talking about things about women in the workplace and how we define family roles and gender roles within the family. 3 particularly important topics that feminists really approach are the division of household labor, the unequal power in relationship, especially when it comes to domestic violence and interpersonal violence, which is a topic that I research, and care work, which is also a topic that I research. And this really is talking about like when, even if there is a 2-income family household, who's coming home and then also doing the dishes, who's coming home and also in charge of childcare or the kids' homework or getting the kids to bed or the yard work or what have you. Whatever it is, whatever that particular arrangement is it equal? Is it fair? Does it make sense? Or is it in a more traditional role that there's unpaid labor that's primarily being put onto the women the women that are in the household or the caregivers? And then again, we could I could do an entire another lecture and have on domestic violence and interpersonal violence, and it's and the feminist perspectives on those things. So if you are interested in that, I could talk for a long time on that, but I'm going to spare you for now. So we're going to talk a little bit about how families dynamics have changed over the course of time, and really how sociologists are looking at that and the factors for which those changes have had to happen. So one thought is that to the modern period, or the extended or multi-generational family was the predominant family form. However, through the 17th, 18th, and 19th century in the United States, the average household size was four to five people, often including domestic servants. More Americans are living in multi-generational households today than ever before. And again, a lot of sociologists are pointing that towards economics. When a single income doesn't influence or can't carry a household, then more help is needed. There's more benefits of including multi-generational households. On top of that, we have a very aging population that is going to have to figure out how to either economically care for these individuals, or they're going to end up part of these multi-generational households because there's a lack of economic means in order to figure out another solution and or to want another solution. And the more medical advancements, the longer people are going to live. Again, so this is really going to talk about this a lot. I just kind of went over these points. The only one that's on here that I didn't really touch on was the number of the growing immigration population and the rise in number of single or divorced parents that reside in their parents' home. And that's, again, due to economic means, due to the ability to really have enough income to provide for oneself. You're also going to see that there's a rise in children living with their parents much older into their life than previously happened in other generations, just solely because of the economic strain on those coming out of high school, those coming out of college at this point, and whether or not those jobs are going to be enough economically to survive in some of the geographic regions and or ridiculous housing markets that we currently operate in. All right. So family life across the road has been transformed over the past 3 centuries through a variety of reasons. I'm going to get a drink of water. Hold on. Okay. So one of the main reasons that kind of this idea of family or marriage has significantly changed is this idea in Western culture of romantic love. Romantic love was not necessarily considered remotely close to part of the view of marriage or the ideas of these kind of relationships up until extremely recently. And those ideas of romantic love being part of and choice almost being, well, that's even more recent, being part of these marriage arrangements really has changed the notion of marriage, especially within the United States. The development of centralized governments and regions previously composed of autonomous smaller societies. So you're going to look at multiple maybe indigenous cultures that then get engulfed into colonialism, and then particular notions of marriage or society or governmental policies are going to then change how families operate and how communities operate within that area. And then employment opportunities such as government bureaucracies, mines, plantations, and industrial firms. All of these different kinds of economic systems are going to have an influence in marriage, because it's going to have an influence in how many kids you need. Because if you live on a farm and you end up having a lot of kids and they help or what have you, that's going to operate significantly differently than government, like someone who maybe lives in a big city with very limited housing opportunities, with very limited economic means. You're going to end up having less kids because the jobs that you cater to are not going to cater to, hey, I need a whole bunch of kids to help me with my work, because my work's not going to have anything to do with those particular dynamics, if that makes sense. All right, 7 changes in family patterns worldwide. So these are the 7 important trends in global family changes over the past half century. Clans and other kin groups are declining in influence. So other kinds of kin groups outside of maybe your nuclear family and such, or your even multi-generational families are really in decline. There's a general trend towards the free choice of spouse and romantic partner. The rights of women are more widely recognized with respect to both initiating marriage and making decisions within the family household. Kid marriages are less common, meaning that you're marrying someone that you are related to. Higher levels of sexual freedom are developing in societies where they were formerly restrictive. And so this is going to even talk about sex, childbearing, all of these things outside of marriage. All of these things are becoming far, far more common. Birth rates are declining, meaning that women are giving birth to fewer babies. And the general tends toward extending children's rights, especially when it comes to any kind of abuse and or maltreatment. All right. Additional trends within the families worldwide, and these in many countries, especially Western societies, 5 additional trends are being seen. An increase in the number of births that occur outside of the marriage. Again, we were just kind of talking about that. A liberation of laws and norms regarding divorce. So again, divorce used to be something that was so extremely stigmatized, and now it is a very common practice. An increase in non-marital cohabitation, or partners just living together as opposed to being married. An increase in age of first marriage and first birth, which is good because the female body has to be able to physically handle it. And with the increase in age for women carrying and having children, you're going to see a decrease in infant mortality and mother mortality. A growing number of and cultural and legal acceptance of same-sex couples. So again, this is going to be LGBTQ plus marriage and family rights. So we're going to talk a little bit about dating. Choosing one's own life partner based on physical attraction, personality compatibility, or a feeling of having someone's soulmate is a very modern and Western phenomenon. So this is not something that happens in every society, even to this day. And it's not something that necessarily is thought about in a lot of ways. Arranged marriages were the norm in most parts of the world up until the 18th century and largely disappeared from Western industrial nations as the values of individualism and personal autonomy flourished. Now, I'm going to say that I'm going to add some caveats to this. First of all, not all arranged marriage were done out of or even currently are done out of this whole notion of two people who never met and are marrying for money or what have you. A lot of arranged marriages in a lot of societies and cultures were based on compatibility, were based on family connections. So like, hey, you grew up, this is the person you grew up with. For a long period of time, this is the person who lived next door, and your families are always been very close or what have you. And or a lot of arranged marriages in a lot of societies also had consent of the people that were going to be in there. Hey, this is who we're thinking about doing this with. How do you feel about that? This is someone that you're friends with. This is someone that you like, what have you. And so they're really invested in making sure these relationships work. So that's not necessarily just like, hey, I'm going to throw you into the water. Now, that being said, there are still a lot of societies, and they are in minority at this point, but a lot of societies that still view women as property. And in those societies, her choice is far less. However, the man generally gets some form of choice. And the last thing I will say about arranged marriages is that also, while we don't technically have arranged marriages in the United States, there is still a lot of societies or a lot of groups of within our societies and subcultures that really, really desire and push their children towards marriage within that particular demographic. So you're going to have still a largely opposing view of interracial marriage in some cases. You're going to have especially when it comes to religion. People are going to want you to marry within your religion. Parents are going to want you to marry within your social class. Parents are going to want you to marry within, in some cases, even a social network. So while arranged marriages are not the case anymore, there's still a significant amount of barriers that families put on younger generations to meet particular ideas and notions of what their children's spouses should look like. In the United States, the relationship between dating and premarital sex has shifted dramatically over the last century. There is some research that says that there's this dramatic shift is not as dramatic as we think, but the outward being able to display that or talk about it and or claim it is dramatically different. And so there is that particular notion within this research. So while a lot of research says, hey, look, in this particular era, say the 20s, this was super frowned upon. So they started dating, marriage happened early so they could have sex. There's also a lot of significant data that says that sex outside of the marriage was something that has always been there, has always been predominantly the case. And that even within the marriage time period of marriages, there's a significant amount of infidelity that has always been cataloged. It's just not something that is necessarily talked about. And again, that stems down to within Western culture, monogamy is still something that is fairly new, and within worldwide, monogamy is something that is fairly uncommon. In the 1960s and 70s, premarital sex became more widely accepted. The free love and hippie movement and a lot of other things, and even the feminist movement. And really, we're talking about that rushing into sexual relationships should not be a point for marriage because that can cause significant amounts of harm and power differentials. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, young people have the option of the hookup culture and or sexual partner rather than going to traditional dates like dinner and a movie. So again, separating that idea that all romantic interests are in sexual in nature, and that you can have sex outside of a romantic partnership. Marriage. The United States has long had high marriage rates, but recent evidence shows that the age in which Americans marry for the first time has risen sharply in recent decades. Some possible reasons for that include increases in cohabitation, increases in post-secondary enrollment, especially among women, and the modernization and secular changes in attitudes promote individualism and downplay the importance of marriage. Sociologists have documented differences in family structure based on race. Again, there are cultural variations among even within racial categories and geographic regions and religious ideology, things that structure some of those differences. Again, so some of those early studies really just failed to distinguish between race and ethnicity. Recent scholarships focus more on critical importance of social structures and factors like economic resources and that are point to the key differences within family structure, which again we talked about earlier in this lecture. The lower you are in the economic totem pole, the more likely you are to live in more multi-generational families and have less access to a nuclear family situation should you want it. In Native American families, kinship ties are very important. They're maybe less prominent for those who live far away from reservations. So again, Indigenous people live in a variety of different cultural and social variations. And that's due to not only colonialism, but also due to a just Indigenous people live in multitudes of different geographic regions and have different religious views, have different social views, have been influenced by different colonial forces. And all these things have led to a multitude of different variations of what family structures look like in Native American society. There are higher rates of intermarriage and than any other racial demographic, and that's because of literally population decline and the differentials that have happened there due to massive genocidal practices. Native American women have a low overall birth rate, but a high percentage of these births occur outside of marriage. Native American women are also one of the higher demographics for domestic and inter and interpersonal violence and sexual violence, um, due to the fact that being put on a reservation and or having less economic means, um, and less sovereignty as persons. Um, Native American women are particularly vulnerable to kinds of violences done in a colonialistic fashion, meaning that white predominant culture, and the men in that causing harm to indigenous women. Again, so and or um, those situations, those in those particular situations having extremely high stress and stressors and economic stressors, and that being a demographic charge for violence. Persons in Hispanic and Latinx homes originally vary widely with respect to culture, history, and socioeconomic status. Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and Cubans are the three largest Hispanic subgroups in the United States, which we talked about in a previous lecture. Mexican American families often live in multi-generational households and have high birth rates due to the immigration process. Family members from Mexico and other Central American nations have often experienced separation from one another and can live in multiple locations over the course of their life. Puerto Ricans do not have an immigration barrier, really. They are the most economically disadvantaged of all the major Hispanic groups in the United States. Cuban American families are the most prosperous of all Hispanic groups, but are still less prosperous than whites. Black Americans are a diverse group, including a wide variety of social and geographic regions. The United States, who have lived in the United States for generations, as well as more recent immigrants from Africa, Caribbean, and Latin America. US born Black and white families differ dramatically in family structure due to structural factors such as economic resources that facilitate marriage and marriage stability. Black people have higher rates of child bearing outside of marriage and are less likely to marry and less likely to marry after having a non-marital birth. The contemporary state of the US born Black families has deep historical roots. One social condition that contributes to high rates of non-marital child bearing is what Wilson calls a shortage of marriageable Black men. And again, part of that comes down to economic resources. Part of that comes to massive over-incarceration, which we're going to get into in another chapter. And some of that also has to do with the educational injustices and neighborhood injustices, and again, there's multitudes of factors for why that is. African Americans are often embedded in a larger and more complex family networks than whites. These include ties to a source of both support and strain. One of the resources that I gave you all in your email, or I'm going to give you in your email, is going to be on research that has been done on specifically other mothers and other caregivers within the Black community and how they shape and structure and work together in order to create childcare solutions and or raise and or advocate for a generation underneath them. Most research on Black families to date focuses on US born African Americans. Emerging research shows that vast differences in experiences of US born versus immigrant Black people in the United States. Asian American families historically have been characterized by interdependence among members of extended family. Family interdependence also helps Asian Americans prosper financially. Also, the idea that this particular group for an extended period of time in the early formation of the United States were considered to be in that more white category also helped that, and depending on the color of your skin and how dark it would be in this particular demographic, would very much greatly influence your economic prosperity. Chinese American and Japanese American women have much lower fertility rates than other racial and ethnographic groups, due partly to their high levels of educational attainment. Multiracial families. So interracial marriage was legal based on the Loving in Virginia in the Supreme Court in 1967. In 2015, 17% of the U.S. newlyweds had a spouse of a different race or ethnicity. And this is widely, widely different than the 60s. This is this has been socially growing in acceptance, similar to same-sex marriage over the course of many generations. And we are now at a point in which interracial marriage is predominantly accepted in the U.S. and our U.S. territories. Some studies suggest the stability of interracial marriages varies based on race and gender of each partner, and that's true. Some studies suggest that spouses in intermarriages may be vulnerable to discrimination and microaggressions caused by social values being slow to change. Race and class each have distinctive and complicated influences on family behavior. White people from working class, poor, often rural backgrounds report strong ideological support for marriage, yet they are more likely than their wealthier peers to get pregnant prior to marriage, marry young, or subsequently divorce. Middle-class Black families are more likely to live in married couple households than their working class and poor peers. Recent studies have found that the single person household is increasingly popular among Black middle-class young adults. Divorce rates increased steadily through the latter half of the 20th century. So again, those have been on the rise. They continue to stay on the rise, but are rising less dramatically, I think, at this point. One calculation, about half of the children born in 1980 became members of a one-parent household at some point. The financial toll of divorce is much more severe on women than it is on men. And that's again to these ideas of breadwinner situations and being able to have access to economic means. It also comes down to gender inequality within the workplace and the fact that women across the board make less than men do. And so, in order to gain, really, in order to gain economic stability where women would not feel that as bad, they would have to be equally paid for the jobs that they are done and have equal levels of education and have equal access to hiring practice within hiring practices, promotion practices, et cetera, et cetera. The psychological consequences for divorce are less profound than previously thought. Reasons for divorce. Divorce rates are not a direct indicator of marital unhappiness. Some can be changes in law made divorce easier. Individuals may now file a no-fault divorce where one or both parties want the marriage to end without a need to present evidence that one's fault in that one person is at fault. Except for a few wealthy people, marriage no longer reflects the desire to perpetuate property or status across generations. Recent research also found several common effects of divorce on children. Almost all children experience an initial period of intense emotion and upset after parents split. Most resume normal development without serious problems within 2 years. And a minority of children experience long-term problems as a result of the breakup and may persist into adulthood. Reparenting. Today, fully 40% of marriages involve at least one previously married person, and 20% involve two previously married persons. Men are more likely than women to repartner. A step family is family in which one partner has children from a previous marriage living in either in the home or living in the home or nearby. So essentially your step children would be children of that your partner had previously to you. A step parent would be if one of your parents married someone else and you now acquired a step parent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Certain difficulties arise in step families. There is usually a biological parent, likely elsewhere, whose influence over the child remains powerful. Cooperative relations between ex-partners often become strained when one or more remarry and enter a new cohabitating union. Since both step parents belong to two households, the possibilities of clashing of habits and outlooks are considerably higher. Single parent households are on the rise, with 11 million single parent households in the United States with children under the age of 18 in 2018. And I would say that that probably has increased. More than 80% of such families are headed by women. The socioeconomic status of single parent households varies greatly. Single parenthood tends to be a changing state, and most people do not wish to be single parents, but a growing minority choose to have children, have a child or children without the support of a partner. All right, family violence. So violence within the family is perpetuated primarily by men, and that's pretty consistent over most data. The main categories are child abuse and intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence also includes sexual violence, domestic violence, and even sometimes it's also date rape is also included in those things. It is difficult to obtain national data about either type of violence because of their sensitive and private nature, and a multitude of barriers that are there for survivors of violence. There are significant amounts of barriers in reporting, and those we can get into in another lecture if you are interested. I have some of that. Family violence was particularly acute during the COVID-19 pandemic when stay-at-home orders trapped many victims with their abusers. Child abuse. The most common definition of child abuse is a serious physical harm with intent to injure. One national study of married or cohabitating adults indicated that about 3% respondents abused their kids. 3%, 3 out of every 100 is a lot of kids. And I would say that probably that is underreported. Research has estimated that as many as 50 to 60% of child deaths are from abuse or neglected are not recorded. So it's a staggering percentage. Among populations of children, there are some racial and ethnic of the same racial or ethnicity. American Indian, Alaskan Native children suffer the highest rates of abuse, while Black children experience the second highest. Intimate partner violence. Abuse of one's spouse or romantic partner is widespread in the United States. Michael Johnson identified two broad types of interpersonal violence, which is patriarchal terrorism, is perpetuated by power and control, and common couple violence, which is generally a specific incident or not rooted necessarily in power and control. So one really big fight leads to some pushing, some shoving, what have you. Sociological studies show that interpersonal violence is closely related to structural factors such as economic prosperity, such as, or economic hardships, really, such as differing personality, like seriously different personalities, such as other structural factors. Am I not thinking of structure as a like working environment, whether or not both of them work, whether or not, and there's a long list that I apparently am not capable of rattling off right this second. All right, so our last section here, how do new families form? Family forms affect your life. So cohabitation, again, two people living in a sexual relationship with some permanence without being married to one another. Cohabitation is also being referred to in a very weird way, talking about long-term partnerships such as long-term roommates, or the ability to go, are those who choose to get housing or what have you with someone they are close with, as opposed to a partner, a romantic or sexual partner. Cohabitation also is seen in a lot of chosen families of LGBTQ plus persons. Cohabitation is also seen more highly in older adults who maybe are past the point in which um, they could just go and live with, like, so let me give an example. So a lot of maybe older adults that have lost, are widowed maybe now, or are now done raising their kids and were single parents, now deciding to pool resources to maybe have a better financial situation come retirement. The proportion of young couples who cohabitate has risen steeply from 11% in the early 70s to 50% today. So again, you're going to see a very steep rise in cohabitation. One key reason for that is that it saves money. Also, it gives you an ability to see how you interact with a person prior to, say, something like marriage, or that locks you into any kind of other financial commitments. Most couples cohabitate is a temporary state of leading either to marriage or a breakup. However, studies show that a small subset of people cohabitate may be the end goal. Cohabitation. There we go. Same-sex household make up 0.8% of the U.S. Households, and this share is projected to increase steadily. I would say that that's probably already increased past that point. And our definition of what and who are LGBTQ plus varies on the research, and so that would also make that particular demographic change. 8.1% of same-sex couples and over 24% of same-sex female couples raised children between 2014 and 2016. So raising kids is still a big part of the lives of these individuals. Just 68% of same-sex couples have biological children only, compared through 95.5% of same or different sex married couples. All 50 states allow LGBTQ plus individuals to adopt, although states vary in their policies. So there are significant amounts of changes happening in that, including the decision for religious-based adoption agencies. The Supreme Court just handed down a decision not that long ago that allows them to discriminate or say that they cannot be part of these adoption processes, and that they can specifically deny a couple based on that particular faction. Second parent adoption is when a family in which one partner adopts a child and the other partner applies to be the second parent or co-parent. And then you have joint adoption, which is when both partners adopt a child together. A strong consensus has emerged among scholars that the ability to parent effectively is not related to sexual orientation. Rosenfeld found that children of gay parents are just as likely as children of straight parents to achieve academic success and progress in school. Most studies also showed no differences in psychological adjustment of children raised by same-sex couples. The major difference you see is usually keyed into diversity within their social groups. And you also see an increase in social justice mindsets within this particular group. Stacy and Villars, we'll go with that, found that children in gay households are more likely to back stereotypical male-female behavior, to buck up against stereotypical male-female behavior. So again, you're going to see more social justice, you're going to see more progressive thinking, you're going to see more pushback to what is or isn't societally acceptable within these peer groups. The number of people living alone in the US society has increased dramatically in the last recent decades. People are marrying far later than ever. The rise in stabilization of divorce rates over time has resulted in more people living alone. The aging US population, who are then widowed, has grown, and the stigma of being single has really diminished significantly. I would say that being single long term has different societal effects for women than it does for men. You're going to see a different kind of social pushback and or distinguishing factors depending on your gender. White women between the ages of 15 to 50 are considerably more likely than Hispanic or Black women to be child-free. Asian women are more likely than any other race to be childless. And again, that comes down to very high education rates and being part of academic fields that require a lot more time, such as medical or um, medical jobs like doctors or what have you, um, et cetera, et cetera. Women with college degrees or higher are more likely than high school graduates or dropouts to have no children. Reasons for not having children are often social and psychologically rather than biological. And being child free is becoming less stigmatized as well. All right, so that's all I've got for you today. If you have any questions or comments, as always, please feel free to watch out or to reach out, and I am more than happy to discuss anything you have.